All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain and hopefully clean up the mess and make things a little more understandable. At least that's Sam's goal today. I am the everyman with the thick candy shell around his brain that is hopefully going to tell him if it makes sense, because we're going to be talking about witchcraft today, right?
Yes, I have been reading the witchcraft, and again, I keep getting back to one of the big themes is that it actually doesn't matter to me which side is right or wrong, or if it's something in the middle, if they're spreading their message with dishonesty.
Mhm.
And in this holier than thou righteous war on both sides right now, the my freedoms crowd or the I'm righteous because I'm saving lives crowd, they're both spreading their message with a lot of inflammatory language, first of all, provocative language, provocating as in provoking an attack, and through dishonesty and really butchered statistics and hoping people don't know, again, the witchcraft. So the CDC is throwing a bunch of that language out there that most people don't know how to read, and they say, oh, well, they're the experts. I don't get it, so they must be smarter than I am.
Mhm.
Whereas on the other side, you're getting a lot of butchered statistics that throw it the other way. Again, the 99.99% survival rate, well, that was kind of not true as well. So that's as just one example. But what got me on this route was something was fishy with the FDA approval. And we got to do our disclaimer. We're not doctors. Consult your doctor. You make the decision that is best for you. We are not anti-vaccine. We are anti-mandates. I would say that's safe to say for both
And
of us.
anti-dishonesty.
And anti-dishonesty. So the FDA approval is a very veiled, cloudy bait and switch. So the question everybody needs to ask themselves is, if we have an FDA approved vaccine, why do we still have the emergency use authorization for the vaccine that's out there? And the answer is because it's not the same vaccine and it's not available to us right now. So bring up my scope. Let me make it to where you can share screens too. Okay. So we go to the FDA.gov website. FDA approved the first COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccine has been known as the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine and will now be marketed as Comernity for the prevention of COVID-19 disease in individuals 16 years or older. It also continues to be available under the emergency use authorization for 12 to 15-year-olds, including 12 to 15-year-olds, and administering of the third dose. So they're stating there that it's the same thing. It's just going to be marketed as a different name. So there is the misleading information. So I fact checked this and dub it misleading, and it needs a little asterisk next to it so everybody can look deeper into it. Because make sure I'm in the right one. Not that one. Okay. So we've got Comernity and the Pfizer vaccine that's currently out there, which is known as BNT 16 or 162B2. That's the current one that's out there. Comernity, right here, the fact sheet for that is the new one that is technically FDA approved, which is also a little bit misleading because it is actually just the start of the process. And there's a application period that's still in effect where people can come forward and contest the approval, et cetera. I'll let the legal guys go look at Robert Barnes' law or Viva Barnes' law, and you can get more information on the legal part of that. I'm not going to go into that. But the main thing is it's still in the process. So approval is is not the right word. Approved is not the right word right now. Approval process would be the right word. And my point is it's not the same thing. So they say it's the same. It's what is currently available, but it's not. We have BNT 162b2 and we have Comernity. Now, why did I bring this one up? This is actually the application for the one that is currently on the market, which was never approved. This is Pfizer in cooperation with BioNTech for this specific vaccine. This is the actual approval. It is BioNTech in partnership with Pfizer. So it's actually a different company partnering. So they're two different companies. They're partnering together, but one is the lead on one formulation. The other is the lead on the other. So one is on the market right now as the emergency use. The other is not on the market and has not been made available to everybody. But they say the next statement they make is they are the same formulation. But I'll bring that up later, but they're not. Page 14. All the little bits and parts in it, the delivery mechanism, the other chemicals that are in there, the same, and it does have the messenger RNA. They said they have identical amino acid sequences of the antigens, but Comernity includes the presence of optimized codons to improve the expression. So Comernity is supposedly, and I'm going to assume it got the FDA approval because it is. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt there, a better version of the one that's out there now. So my problem here is, okay, so this is great. So we have an FDA approved vaccine and it's a better version than the one we've been taking. But my problem is they're saying it's the exact same one as the one that's out there because they want you to go get the vaccine right now. And the one that they approved is not available. So they have to convince you that they're the same thing, but they're not.
Yeah, and this is again the politicization of everything, because I think this is directly targeting the fact that, you know, I'm more on the right. Those are the sources I listen to, and the, I guess for lack of a better word, anti-COVID vax crowd, one of their main points is this is an experimental vaccine, which is accurate. That is not inaccurate to say. This is experimental. This has not gone through the normal process. And so a lot of the long-term things that you would normally find out through a vaccine or drug testing process, you can't know because there simply hasn't been the time. So that's one of the points, is this is an experimental vaccine. And so I think the whole point of this is to directly attack that talking point, to say, no, it's not, it's approved, go take it. It's no longer experimental, it's fully approved, except it's not. As you said, first of all, it's begun the approval process, and secondly, this is a different drug.
Yeah, and you can look the person you're talking to straight in the eye and say, okay, if we're going to use FDA approval for its safety, I'll take the FDA approved vaccine when it's available. And it's currently not available, so I'm not going to take it. The one that they improved upon is available. And do we know how great of an improvement that was? No. This is a very vague statement for those that know anything about genetics. They optimize the codons. What the codons are, the three nucleotides together that create, they get attached to by a transcription factor, which gets that code, and it creates an amino acid. And those amino acids combine to create the protein. And in this case, it's the spike protein. So they improved upon it. So it's either in the instruction manual on the RNA, which would determine which ones of those create which amino acids, or they added or subtracted different ones to create a slightly different protein. And the impact of that could be very, 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 very small, or one little change could actually be completely different result from that same code of genetics. So if it comes in there with an instruction manual that says pick A, B, and C amino acids and put them together, well, you change that instruction manual slightly, and it could be AB, it could be AC, it could be ABC, it could be ACD. It could change the whole thing, or you add one and those combinations increase. So if you've got three codons together that make a specific protein, that could have 8 different combinations. If you have 4, it could have 15 different combinations. So that little change could be a huge effect at the end, or it could be almost nothing. We don't know from their statement.
Yeah, optimized is just a buzzword marketing word.
Yeah,
that's not a precise word. The other thing that jumps out at me from my perspective is, again, playing stupid political games. If accuracy and convincing people what is your primary aim, then why don't you just tell people this directly? Why don't you just say, hey, this is what we have, but it's better. So take what's out there now, because it will give you some protection, and then what's coming along is going to be even better. Okay. But they're not saying that. They're trying to pull this sleight of hand to make you think, no, what's out there now is approved. Why not just tell the truth? It's kind of like, there was some new data, and I probably should have had this up, but I didn't think wasn't planning on going there. So from what I've heard, the new data out of Israel is that 25% of hospitalizations right now are vaccinated. Okay, which the anti-vax people
that might be in here, but this is the new data out of Israel that showed that previous infection was better against Delta than Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. So it might be in the same paper. I didn't see that. It might be in here too. But yeah, keep going.
Well, the point was that people who are anti-COVID vax are pointing out, holy cow, 25% of people who are hospitalized already have the vaccine. What's the point of the vaccine? Well, why not just be honest with the data and say, hey, if you have the vaccine, you are 3/4 more likely to not be hospitalized. Sure, there's a 25% chance that you could still end up with a serious case, but isn't it a big positive to say, dude, 3 out of 4 people aren't vaccinated? You increase your likelihood of not being hospitalized if you take this vaccine. Why not just be honest with the data and honest of what it is giving you?
The Israel data on unvaccinated versus vaccinated is slightly misleading because of their immense amount of vaccination. They're about 90%, I think, 90 something percent. So you have a 9-fold population group making up that 25% rate. So when you're talking actual rate, it's lower. You just got 9 times as many people in that pool. And so it is effective against hospitalization. Now, we are seeing that it's becoming less effective, and part of that's variance. And the other part of it is what we're seeing with the vaccines is they have a great antibody response, but then that wanes over time as normal, but they're having a lesser long-term effect, which is, which is where we get to these long-term follow-up studies where we've got 7 months out, 10 months out, and they're all showing natural infection is superior, which is a good thing for those of us that had to go through it. But it also is showing the weakness of the vaccine is we may need boosters.
Yeah, Israel's talking about a 3rd booster already.
Yeah, and that's for vaccinated people. And that's why I hate that the data is so clouded in the US, because they're not separating natural infection versus vaccinated. If they just did that one thing, a lot of things are going to be more clear. And we'll also the publications out of Britain are basically stating that vaccines will never create herd immunity with the way this thing is varying and the way the antibodies are dropping. So the current vaccines, the mRNA vaccines were an amazing technological advancement, even though they existed, but in this specific situation, they were an amazing Band-Aid is what they were.
Yeah.
And so now we need to be going forward saying, okay, they're a great Band-Aid, but we need to figure out a long-term solution. And personally, my view is that should be focusing on treatment and focusing on making healthier populations, more physically fit, more nutritionally informed populations. So I think that's the long-term approach that would work the best. But the vaccines helped. They were a great Band-Aid. They might have saved hundreds of thousands of people in the US. But going forward, if we don't address the long-term solution, we're gonna eat up those hundreds of thousands of saved people with just long-term death tolls. The other approach could be a more complete vaccine, which would be a more traditional style vaccine, which hopefully somebody's getting their ass together and working on. But
Well, there was a paper out of Japan. I know I meant to grab that one too. I don't know if you saw it. And they put a disclaimer on the front that potential conflict of interest, that the people who wrote the paper are with a group that's working on a different vaccine. So they had to put that out there because the paper was basically showing the weaknesses of the current vaccine, which is what we've been talking about, that there are issues, there are trade-offs, there are things you need to know when you're making these decisions. And I think the way the stupid political games are being played shows in the data of vaccination numbers in the US and polling of people who are hesitant or outright refusing to get the vaccine, and contrast that with just a year ago. Contrast that with the panic of the lockdowns and how many people were accepting that and how many people were saying, as soon as the vaccine's ready, I'm getting it. And now all of a sudden I think we're barely over 50% right now, aren't we, of adults in the US who have been vaccinated? I want to say that's the last number I heard.
Just north of 50. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just barely over 50%. And again, contrast that with where we were just a year ago. And I have to think that it's because the experts aren't being honest, and I think it probably started with the vaccine itself, as it was being sold as a miracle. Well, hold on, it's not. There are issues, there are trade-offs. And when all of a sudden it's being sold as a miracle, and then people start seeing personally or hearing stories about, well, hold on, you said this was awesome, this was the greatest thing ever, and my friend had to take 3 days off of work because he was so sick after he got the shot, and et cetera and so forth. And now people are starting to get hesitant because you're not being honest. You're not showing the pros and the cons. And I don't know if you've heard about this. There was a reporter at the Fox affiliate in Houston, and she was fired for exposing how they were being told to push an agenda, not report on the facts. So for instance, there was a case of a 16-year-old kid, Ernesto, I'm drawing a blank on his name, Ernesto something, and he died like 3 days after he got his vaccine, and the autopsy showed his heart had doubled in size, and it was attributed directly to the vaccine. Well, that's just one case. So I'm not saying, oh my gosh, don't get the vaccine or your heart's going to double in size. No, it's one case, but it is a fact. It is something that needs to go on the column of pluses and minuses. And just from a cultural standpoint, that's the kind of news that especially local affiliates gobble up because it's so sensational. It draws clicks, it draws eyeballs. And if she's not being allowed to air that story, it shows you how hard they're pushing an agenda, because that's the kind of story that local affiliates love to show, because it's a human interest story.
Well, we look at the possible differences between what's available now and the new one that is approved. Maybe they address this problem. So now that we understand more about what causes long haul and what is actually happening in our blood plasma, why COVID is so random in its symptoms with everybody, and it seems to attack your most vulnerable spots. We can change the discussion by thinking of COVID as COVID doesn't kill anybody. COVID activates whatever's in your body that's ready to kill you. And it kind of takes on a new meaning. That's why there's 94% comorbidity rate. I bet you if we really dug, we could find something in those 6% that died specifically of COVID, some sort of genetic deficiency or something along those lines, or they just didn't get help in time with the pneumonia effects or something like that, which so many causes of pneumonia that a specific virus just being in your lungs could do that. Yeah. But in that 94%, now that we know that the spike protein causes the inflammation within the blood vessels, if you've got a cardiopulmonary issue and those blood vessels become inflamed, it's just going to exacerbate it, which is probably why this guy's heart expanded out. If you have tendency for blockage within the blood vessels of the heart, you're on your way to a heart attack. Well, guess what? You just created the heart attack because that inflammation closes it the rest of the way. If you have something in your head, like probably, I don't think it's any surprise that the spot of my COVID headaches, which was very localized once the general pain went away, was exactly where I had that concussion back in 2000. Remember the one where I can't even remember 2 weeks of my life? Yeah. And you had to take care of me like a little baby. Yeah, I had a concussion in 2000 and Heath had to be my caretaker, which is probably why it took so long to get better. But
yeah, probably.
But yeah, it was right in that spot. So there's probably damaged tissue in there, and it happens to be close to the olfactory membrane, which is where COVID got into the brain, because it can't penetrate the blood-brain membrane very well, which is great because all the unconscious parts of our brain are back there. But yeah, it's no surprise that it's probably in that tissue that it caused the most damage. But yeah, it's the disease that is perfectly designed. I'm not saying this is a lab design, perfectly designed,
evolutionary design, yeah,
to affect whatever else is in your body at that moment. And I think if we change the discussion in that direction, we would have a different kind of viewpoint on what COVID does.
And that it's interesting that you bring that up, because I got a COVID test a week or so ago, because I've had several people in my extended family that had it and had no idea, because it presented like bad seasonal allergies, which they have. So they didn't think anything of it until someone told them to get tested. And, one person got tested and then told the rest of the family, hey, you might want to get tested of this if you have what you think is a sinus infection or a bad case of seasonal allergies. Because if that's something that you already deal with and is already a weakness, a problem for you, and that's the kind of discussions that need to be had and aren't being had, because people need to know that, hey, you could present in any one of these ways because of these reasons, and so you need to be on the lookout for that. But that's not what we're getting. Instead, what we're getting, this is the one thing I was going to bring up. Here we go. Hey, Sam, did you get vaccinated? Because y'all had a hurricane hit the Gulf Coast. And according to the CDC, to prepare for hurricane season,
I was wondering if this was going to come up.
Understand that your planning may be different this year because of the need to protect yourself and others from COVID-19 in a hurricane. Get a COVID vaccine as soon as you can. COVID-19 vaccines help protect you from getting sick or severely ill with COVID-19 and may also help protect people around you during a hurricane.
Yeah, I'm sure the guy who got eaten by the alligator in Louisiana, because he was trying to get out of his house after the hurricane, that vaccine really helped him out.
Yeah.
Maybe advice to evacuate would have been much nicer.
I mean, for crying out loud, the third thing on your list is to give yourself more time than usual to prepare food and water, medicine, supplies. That's the first thing you do when you have a major natural disaster that you know is coming. Make sure you have emergency stocks of food and water and medicine, because power may be out a long time. You may be stuck in your home for a long time. We were in Joplin when the big honking F5 tornado went through, and they had a boil order for water for like 2 weeks. Power was out in most of the places for like 3 weeks at a minimum. That's the first thing you do. And it's the third thing on your list because you're pushing this COVID-19 vaccine. Is it
and
just
realistically, if you live in an area like that, you should already have that stuff. At least before that season. It shouldn't be a last minute run to the store where everybody's trying to kill each other.
Right. It just screams of political nonsense. It just screams of an agenda that you're putting in your hurricane preparedness. Go get the vaccine. And you wonder why just over 50% of adults are vaccinated and so many people are hesitant, because it sure looks like you're not being honest. It sure looks like you're pushing something other than the health advice that you are supposedly formed to give Center for Disease Control.
Well, that's part of the problem, is they should be an advisory committee, but they are very actively trying to make policy. Was a good one is the eviction moratorium, which thankfully the Supreme Court finally did their job for once and came down on.
And this is something I think I've ranted. I know I've ranted a lot about a lot of things here, but I think I've talked about this specifically, is that you should care how a thing is done, even if you approve of the outcome. Okay, because the ends do not justify the means. That's a good way to get yourself in trouble and go down a bad road in anything. Okay, and so you should care that even if you believe that everyone should get vaccinated, you should care that people are being mandated, that it's being forced, that people are being dishonest with the data. Because what happens down the road when people use the same tactic to do something you don't agree with? Because it's going to happen.
Well, there's that, but the other part is it's always going to be exposed. And so you just create a fight with the people who are exposing it.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's going to call me a conspiracy theorist just because of the actual FDA documents that I brought up to you that show that what they say is not different is different. It's not a conspiracy theory. I just showed you their own documents.
Yeah.
The hospitalization rates that on the CDC's own website, and I should have had this one ready. They showed the difference between the lack of difference in the rates of ICU and death in the hospitalized breakthrough cases versus the hospitalized unvaccinated cases. And then in their conclusion, they say it's way different, so you should still get the vaccine. And it was a little more nuanced than that, because it depended on the age group, it depended on the vulnerability, it depended on comorbidities, it depended on a lot of things. And the actual number we don't know, and so we can never really fact check anything, is the actual breakthrough cases that are not hospitalized or die. We can't know that number because they're not tracking it in the US anyways. We know it from other countries, but we don't know it from
that's why we keep going to the Israel data, because Israel has been very open, which is what you expect out of a governmental organization, is to give data so people can make decisions. And Israel has been very open about their data, and they've been tracking a lot of data.
Well, and you look at a country that's been extremely pro-vaccine, they are the most vaccinated country in the world. Another good one on this is the UK. They're very highly vaccinated. I think it's somewhere 75-80% right now. And their data, people have run wild with this, showing a 6 times death rate of hospitalized people that had the vaccine versus not having had the vaccine. But that number is also skewed because they vaccinated the most vulnerable first. So if they have a breakthrough case, they're more likely to have a bad effect because they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so this is all just muddy water because people are using this data point for their agenda and the other data point for theirs. And what we have to accept, this is a fact we have to accept. It's not a theory or a hypothesis anymore. The CDC is an activist organization at this point.
Yeah.
They have been since about 2010 on a lot of different issues, but they have an agenda. And one of their agendas is vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. And the other agenda is social justice. And they've been using COVID for both. And they've been fudging the numbers for both. And I've showed you the race-based numbers they use and how that was improperly presented. So CDC has an agenda, and it's not necessarily what's best for us. Here's a great example. If they wanted to influence policy that's best for the United States in a COVID-related situation, they should have encouraged the government to close the southern border. We look at the factors.
You racist.
Well, we look at the factors that are contributing to this flare up in the South. We've got the obvious one. It's hot as hell down here, so people are inside sharing the same air. So that's the obvious one. But we also have hundreds of thousands of people crossing the border in groups, pushed together in tight spaces, not good hygiene.
Coming from places that are frankly third world, even if they're, even if there are modern areas in, Mexico and Honduras and et cetera and so forth, a big chunk of the population still lives. It's like what we talked about with India. Yeah, the top 10% or 1% or whatever, they live like you and I do, okay? But man, there's a huge divide between them and everyone else who still lives in a very third world way, which means you have diseases we just don't have here. Legionnaire's disease, cholera, etc. Things that we haven't had in the US in decades. And they have there, and they bring it with them. And as you say, it gets exacerbated because they're in a stressful situation. They don't have access to food and water to keep them healthy. They're packed together.
Yeah.
So you're increasing the likelihood of what's already a bad situation.
And we're showing they're actually testing at a high rate for COVID, but the federal government is trying to make it to where they can't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. And if you're really a public health organization like the CDC should be, the Center for Disease Control, we should be trying to control a disease, not control a people, right? And what we see is the opposite. They're doing things to control people versus actually control the disease, because we got a lot of data points where they're not doing anything, which is included in this border crisis. These people are able to come in, stay in, and disperse without any quarantine, any tracking, any whatever. But you look at the northern border, you need a negative COVID test within 72 hours of crossing the border, and then another one within 72 hours of coming back. Plus a lot of other checks and balances. I got a client that he works for a large company, and he has to go to a funeral in Canada for one of their big client-based relations things. And he's got to go through this giant process to get into Canada and then get back. And we're not even confident he's going to get back in a reasonable amount of time, because you could also get a false negative, or you could contract COVID when you're over there, or something along those lines. So I made a meme for him just for fun. And I think I'll share it with everybody. I think it's pretty accurate. You had a good thumbnail for the cover of this one, but that one's pretty good too. Maybe we'll save that one too.
Yeah.
But it's accurate. back to the original point, if the CDC was doing its job versus trying to push an agenda, that would be part of the discussion. And they would be backing the people who want to at least control what's coming into the country, even if it's not stopping it.
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned before, if your goal is vaccination, why aren't you having Trump as one of your spokesmen? Because he's been very pro-vax, but you don't hear about him anymore because he's basically been banned from all normal media. He has to issue his own press releases and go on friendly shows, but none of the main media is covering it because he's persona non grata. Well, just bring him in and say, hey, we're not going to talk any politics. We don't care. We just want to know. We just want you to tell people why you think they should get vaccinated. Tell people who support you and like you why they should get vaccinated. Is anyone old enough to remember back a decade ago or a little over a decade ago when and I'm just barely old enough to remember the 1992 campaign because of my
12.
age then.
Yeah.
And I was kind of starting to pay attention to politics already. It was a very bitter campaign between H.W. Bush and Clinton. And yet, when was it? I think it was around the Haiti earthquake or hurricane that hit Haiti. And they came together and they did this for a while afterwards, of Bush and Clinton together for raising funds and awareness for humanitarian relief, for disaster relief, for things like this, because it had ostensibly nothing to do with politics. So they could put that aside and say, hey, people on the right, people on the left, people who support me, we can all agree on this one thing that has nothing to do with politics and work together towards that goal. If that's really your goal, then why is Trump nowhere to be seen? Because you know that 60 million people or whatever it was, or 50 something million people didn't vote for Joe Biden. So if the Biden administration is all you're going with and that's your main talking point, then do you not care about the other people?
Well, this I don't know if you saw it, but Jen Psaki was asked this direct question. Why aren't they doing a collaboration? And her answer was, if Trump wants to do it, he should come forward.
How?
Yeah, exactly. And that's been the nature of this whole process. Is he wants to come forward, he just has no platform. And we're stuck in this have your people call my people.
You are the White House press secretary, and you're either lying or you're uninformed, because he is coming forward. As I said, he issues his own press releases. He goes on friendly right-leaning shows that'll have him on, and he makes a big deal about the vaccine, in partly because I think he does actually care and think he had COVID, so he probably has a personal stake in it, but he also has a personal political stake in it, in that Operation Warp Speed and the vaccine is a big part of his legacy. So he's trying to push that as part of his legacy. Which is
actually one of my beefs with this whole process is
yeah.
all of the literature, all of the clinical trials, all of the hope to be randomized controlled trials, and the prospective cohorts and everything were defunded the exact time that Warp Speed started. And they were showing a lot of promise with a lot of easy treatments early on that prevented death and hospitalization, and those halted. And even some out of, I think it was McKinney, Texas, were 85% success rates for preventing death and long haul and stuff. I'm like, 85% is a big number.
Yeah.
And if that held, we got to say if, and we got to,
and again,
speculate.
We don't know because
we don't know because we can't
but
know.
It's something we should know.
But if we had continued down that path and it showed the same success, or even lesser, we'll say 50%, that's 300,000 people that are still alive. Even if it was, almost half of, or a little more than half of what they originally showed, we'd still have 300,000 people alive today that aren't alive. but we don't know. We can't know because it was all halted, and it became, Trump's administration was vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. And who knows why? Because I think he, in this situation, I like to give people credit and blame whenever I can, but I think he's somewhere in the middle on this one. He knows nothing about medicine, and he had a lot of people talking in his ear. And I have a feeling he probably wouldn't have even had known that the vaccine itself wouldn't get emergency use if they had viable treatments. So he didn't really even just pay attention to that part. He just wanted what's going to get me popularity. And warp speed was a hugely popular policy. He didn't know the ins and outs under the scene, that it was going to stop any research on any of he didn't know that it was going to be the mechanism that crushed the things he started believing in later, like hydroxychloroquine, and
which is what he was treated with.
Which is what he was trying to, which became the, oh, you're a Trumper, you believe in this, you're a conspiracy theorist or whatever. He would make statements in support of those things, and I don't think he knew that his policy on warp speed was what blocked any good actual data behind those things that he believed in. Because why would you openly contradict yourself like that if you even knew what you were talking about?
Right.
So this is one instance where being not a career politician shot him in the ass, because he didn't know the effect of what he started with warp speed. Yeah. But he did want that legacy, and he's still trying to get it right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up. Is I said I was going to tease. I want to tease what I want to talk about next time, which is we've been pounding on the CDC and the media and the Biden administration for pushing the current vaccines in a political and a dishonest way. But I do want to next time dig into some of the big anti-vax people on the right, because my gut is they're going overboard in the other direction, and they're kind of overselling the data they're using to completely destroy the vaccine, rather than presenting an actual balanced view of these are the problems, but these are the positives. And so I do want to go into that. One of them, he's not on the right, actually. He was a New York Times science reporter, and he's written a number of books. Alex Berenson, who you may have heard of because he was recently banned from Twitter, and he's now talking about suing Twitter for defamation and other things for that ban. Basically for calling the vaccine a therapeutic, which the technical jargon there is simply that if it's a therapeutic, it's therapy, it's treatment, it's not prevention, which is what a vaccine is or is supposed to be. And that's basically why he was banned. And he has data. You don't have to agree with him, but I was digging around on his Substack today, and that's why I decided, okay, we needed to devote a whole segment to this and talk about just this. So him, Steve Deace is one of the, or Deace, I think is how he pronounced. Steve Deace is one of the podcasters on the right who's been big about hammering the vaccine and the vaccine data. So I want to dig into not only what they're saying, but the sources they're using, because I want your take on it. Because again, my gut is whenever I hear someone talking in absolutes and things that, without presenting the math, I start to get questioning. I start to get a little nervous and doubtful of them, because there's not a lot in this world that is absolute.
Well, yeah, and that's the problem. And now we're looking at the other side, is you can't say that the vaccines don't help prevent the disease, because they do. And every bit of data suggests that they also prevent severity of the disease. And the more we're vaccinated, the more skewed that number is going to be, because you're getting a bigger victim pool, basically. And so you can't make that argument that's extreme on the other end And I hate that it became a political divide on this, the right and the left, but
Yeah.
it has. They're doing the same thing the social justice movement did in the race war. Is they're taking anecdotes of the worst case scenarios, someone who died of a blood clot after the vaccine, or someone who the 4-time rate heart expansion of that one person. They're taking those anecdotes and treating them like the norm. This is what happens to you if you take the vaccine. It's again, it's the same strategy that same side fights when we're talking the social justice issues. So and realistically, I think it needs to be combated the same way. You say, hey, no, you're doing this strategy. All those things you said might be true, but it's not the truth for the population. It's the truth for that person. And we can't dictate policy on my truth. We can only dictate policy on what's going to be the best for the collective. That is the United States of America.
I had an analogy for this about confirmation bias, which is when you go looking for things that can affirm the thing you already think, rather than as objectively as possible. I say that because we're all biased, as objectively as possible, looking at the data and then deciding what it means. New kid I've been trying to train has been something of a challenge, because he's been a competitive swimmer since he was really young. Okay. And he's got low back pain. And I can see, I think a layman could see, just looking at him, you have excessive curve in your low back. Okay. And you have putting him through my mobility evaluation, you've got some hip mobility issues. Well, because of my own personal issues, and because of most of what I have dealt with is desk jockeys who have excessive low back curve because they sit too much and it makes their hips tight. Okay. Well, the more I have dug into it and looked at professional articles on the impact of competitive swimming on the spinal structure, and then it dawned on me, his hip problems are from his low back. His low back isn't from his hip.
Which is usually the other way around.
And it's usually the other way around. That's mostly what I've dealt with. That's what my problem is because of my neck. I sit too much, which makes my hips tight, which gives me low back problems. I'm constantly in a tug of war with that. And that's what most desk jockeys are, because they're sitting at a desk. Well, it matters. The difference matters in how you approach the treatment. I mean, there's going to be some similarities, obviously, but if I had been too rigid in my thinking and never seen that, I wouldn't have been able to adjust my program for him to better address what is going on.
Careful your terminology there. Don't call it treatment.
That's a good point. Yes,
that's a clinical term. Yeah.
I am not a doctor.
Yeah, we're not doctors. We just play one on a podcast. No, we don't clip that. We are not doctors. We are not giving specific medical advice. Consult your doctor. If your doctor is making absolute statements, probably maybe find a new doctor, but or at least get a second opinion and make sure they match. And we are not giving medical advice. So that is just to make that clear. I just like exposing lies because it's kind of fun these days.
It's getting a little too easy though. All right.
It is.
Well, I think that's a place to wrap it up and take a little break on this subject. And then we're going to move on to something else, right?
Yeah. What do we want to talk about? We need to do some fitness stuff, maybe some nutrition stuff, because that's it's part of the cure. What else do we need to look at? I want to talk about the FBI and its handling of domestic terror and how it's creating the problem that it's saying it's fighting, which we should be continually getting a steady stream of good information on that with the Whitmer case.
All right. Well, then we'll get to that next.
All right. That's what is this, episode 21?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll talk to you later.
All right. Later. Bye.